So welcome everyone from wherever you are. I would like to introduce Kate now, our speaker. Kate is going to put up her video here on the screen, and here we go. So Kate has been a program manager at SeedChange for more than 25 years, supporting partners in Timor Leste, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Driven by a passion for seed saving, she's also been an active contributor to Canada's seed movement, serving on the board of Seeds of Diversity from 2012 to 2017, and now volunteering with the Ottawa Seed Library. Kate has degrees in history, rural planning, and food security from Queen's and the University of East Anglia in the UK and Ryerson University. I know we're all looking forward to hearing more about their interesting projects supporting community seed banks in Timor Leste and how community seed banks help people and help with food security around the world. So please join me in welcoming Kate, and the way we're going to do applause tonight is to put a plus sign in the chat. So feel free to put some plus signs in the chat as applause, and we will welcome Kate. Kate, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's very nice to be a part of this event tonight, even from this far east, from you in Manitoba. It's really nice to feel the community that we're so grateful to be partners with MCIC. USC Canada, which is our former name, has been active in the province in Manitoba for many, many, many decades, since our first years in the late 1940s when there were volunteer groups in Winnipeg and in Brandon. Through to the last 30 years or so when we have been members of MCIC and have been very fortunate to have board members from Manitoba, including just our board chair who just left, cycled out a couple of years ago, was someone based in Winnipeg, and he's been continues to be very active as a volunteer with us. So it's really nice to be together with you this evening and to share with you a little bit about our programs and especially the issues of food security and seed security in Timor-Leste. I'm hoping to speak for about 20-25 minutes, and there'll be polls and some questions during my slide presentation, and then we'll have ample time for discussion at the end, and you're very welcome to contact me afterwards, and I've put all of those contacts at the end of the slide presentation. So on this lovely, warm, early summer evening here in Canada, I wanted to say bon dia and dia kalai and show you a picture of Timor-Leste. This is from up in the middle of the island country looking to the north. Bon dia is Portuguese for good day, or it's used universally in Timor-Leste. And dia kalai is in Tetun, which is the greeting word in the most prominent of the indigenous languages to Timor-Leste. So it's very common to be greeted with both and to respond with both. So bon dia and dia kalai. Bon dia is, as I said, is good day, and dia kalai is sort of where are you at, which is sort of asking, you know, what's your status at the moment, both in your heart and your spirit and how you're feeling and things like that. So I thought I would show you through some of these pictures a little bit about Timor-Leste. I have been very fortunate to know our partner organization there and work very closely with them for the last 5 years. And I'm so glad to be able to share what the progress that they've been able to make and the issues and their very, very strong commitment to their own country's food security and food sovereignty. It's a lovely, lovely little island to land in. As you come in by plane, you come down, and this is actually a picture from quite near the airport. And I like it because it has these very old fishing boats, some active, some not active in the foreground. And then you can see in the background a large tanker ship, which really tells the story of right now in Timor-Leste, a very ancient place with traditions and cultures and language and faiths. And then the modern world. They happen to have offshore oil and natural gas, which is a great geopolitical issue between Timor-Leste and Australia and Timor-Leste and Indonesia, and a lot of multinational corporations. They're also very dependent on sources of commercial goods, food, supplies. Everything comes in by container ships, such as you see in the background there, just outside the harbor in Dili. I'm just wondering if anybody's heard of Timor-Leste, perhaps recently in the news or any time in the past, if anybody's heard of Timor-Leste. And here's the first one of our polls. We'll give a few more seconds for everyone to check in, and then Grace will give us the results. Oh, good. Lots of people have heard of it. I'm glad, because even though it is very, very far away from Canada, from Manitoba, it's got some common themes, which you might notice throughout the I wonder, can I close that? Ah, good. Just learning how to use those polls. That hearing that some of you may have been more familiar with the name that Timor-Leste was known by for many, many years, which was East Timor. And it is at the farthest end of the Indonesian archipelago, just across the Timor Sea from Darwin and Australia. And it has had a long, turbulent history. And some of us, if you were around university campuses in the 1980s and early 90s, the Free East Timor coalitions and student movements and political pressure was very, very strong from Canada to support the independence of Timor-Leste to be its own country, apart from Indonesia. The island of Timor was held as a Portuguese colony for 400 years. From the early 1500s, it was held by the Portuguese Empire as a trading outpost and was really considered the last place you got sent, especially if you weren't in favor with the royal family. You were sort of banished to Timor-Leste. It was the end of the line. And then it went through the World War II and was occupied during that time. And then a period just after the war, there was Dutch colonization and then Indonesian colonization. And then it was sort of negotiated in the early 1970s that East Timor would become independent. And that independence lasted for only about 3 weeks. And Indonesia moved in and took over the island and held the island very, very tightly under very tight political, military, and cultural control until 1999, when the fall of 1999, the Free East Timor movement and a lot of political pressure from around the world came to force, and East Timor was allowed to become independent and very quickly started to be known as Timor-Leste. The United Nations took over the administration of the country for almost 4 years. And so it really wasn't until 2004 that Timor-Leste really became independent. So they haven't been independent for that long and have had a very long and traumatic history of occupation and lack of self-determination. Get my next slide here. Why isn't it going? There. So this slide gives you a little bit of a positioning with that small map there, and some of the characteristics of Timor-Leste today, and one of the reasons why SeedChange has had its partnership there for so long is particularly because of the food insecurity. Half the population lives on less than $5 a day, and about 2/3 of the communities in the highlands in particular are considered food insecure, in that they don't have enough nutritious food on time and in sufficient qualities to be considered sufficiently nourished. Most of the country is rural. The road infrastructure is coming along very, very slowly to connect people. They mainly grow staples of maize and cassava, and there is absolutely no food surplus from the country. They don't export anything. In fact, they import a great deal of food and commercial goods, both from Indonesia, and a great deal comes from Brazil, because the packaging and everything can be in Portuguese, which is one of the 3 main languages spoken. Now, USC Canada Timor-Leste, which is what we used to have an office there, staffed by local people, and on a few very brief occasions, we did have Canadian staff there, which is very rare for us. But we actually were given very special permission in 1996 by the government of Indonesia to begin working in Timor-Leste purely on food security and community development activities very close to the capital city of Dili. Then, during the very turbulent times of independence, we did hang on and stay working in Timor-Leste. At one time, there were about 15 Canadian NGOs working in Timor, and today we are the last Canadian-based organization providing direct support to an NGO in Timor-Leste. it was a great privilege of mine in 2013 to work with our colleagues that had been our staff colleagues at USC Timor Leste to transform and found their own organization known as REBIA, which is a Tetun acronym for land, air, and sea. So you'll hear me talking about REBIA, and you'll meet a lot of my colleagues who work there. But it was a great privilege of mine to help them form into their own organization in 2013. Here's a map of the country showing the main districts, and those circles represent our main programming areas at this time in Aliu and Manatutu districts, and also in the small enclave of Okuse. I need to look up why there is that one little piece of Timor-Leste in West Timor, which is still part of Indonesia. I'm afraid I don't. I need to study up on that. It's just part of Timor-Leste is the little enclave off there to the west. There are very few roads that go around the country, such as out past Baucau into Lautse or to Vaikeke. You have to go over the mountains. You can't go around the island. There are very few passable roads, but some of them are coming along, though the country is thoroughly inhabited all through the mountains. It's a very young country. The population was very, very depleted through war and through poverty and malnutrition and a lot of disease in the 1970s and 80s and into the 90s. And then with the coming of peace in around 2000 and 2000, the UN mandate meant the population has really, really boomed. And it's a very, very young country when you're walking around in Dili or even in the village communities. You don't see a lot of older people, but you see many, many, many young teenagers, people in their 20s, and lots of kids. This is the office of REBIA, and this is the team of staff that I'm so proud to work with. Some of them have been with us since the very beginning in the late 1990s, and a lot of the young people are now graduating with agriculture and community development degrees from the one university in Timor-Leste, and they're able to do some of their practical field work and postings with REBIA, and some of them are able to work again after their graduation, which is really, really important that it's all young Timorese staff. I would say at this point that REBIA, when they transformed in 2013, they had USC Canada as a donor, and very quickly were able to start having funding support from JICA, which is the Japanese International Development Agency. And you'll see that what the kind of community development and food security work that REBIA does, their reputation grew, and now they have 9 different international donors, including the Asia Foundation, foundations in Brazil, from the European community. JICA continues. A German foundation has just begun funding them as well as ourselves. And we are in fact their smallest donor now. And almost $500,000 US goes through REBIA for their work across the country now. And we're just so glad that USC Canada and SeedChange and Canadian support could help grow from 3 individuals in 1996, barely managing to distribute food and do basic nutrition with mothers and children, to this size of an organization today. It's a really great success story. I would encourage you after this webinar to go to rebia.org and have a look around their website and see how they present themselves, and you can read about some of their other donors. Not all of the newest donors may be on their list under new donors. They're a little slow updating things, but it'll give you a sense of all of the kind of work that they're involved in now as a local NGO. And this is a sort of a schematic that a young Australian volunteer graphic designer who was living in Timor-Leste helped them put together a few years ago. And I really like it because it shows the cycle of the principles behind REBIA's work and their approach to everything that they do. Sustainable land use is so important, and you'll see more of that in the next few slides, leading to more food security, and then coming around to communities being able to thrive and people being healthy, and especially young people. Then empowering farmers to not simply accept the handouts of free seeds or free fertilizers or package programs from dealers and others who are coming into the country, which is very, very common right now, to take some lead in conserving their agricultural skills and promoting things that are going to work for them without spending money on expensive external inputs, which leads to sustainable land use, and it moves around in a circle. And this is what all of those wonderful donors are getting involved with Rebia. And SeedChange is one of their smallest donors, but they always say that we are the first one and the longest one, and will always be with them. So here's a picture of what much of the countryside looked like about 10 years ago. Much of the country was deforested during the Portuguese time, as the Portuguese struggled to hold the island from the various kingdoms that were the rightful inhabitants of the country. But 400 years of back and forth and different battles, and there's great histories and studies that document this from different historians. And then in the more recent era of the last 100 years or so, in the tumult of the Second World War, and then being held by the Indonesians, it was very common to burn the hillsides for conflict, to move people out of the hillsides so that they couldn't fight back, and also to clear hillsides to try and grow rubber or sugarcane. But generally it was that didn't generally work very well, and so the holding powers for the country were constantly pushing people around the island, and that's caused a great loss of life and dislocation and trauma, quite frankly, to the whole society on the island. It had been a long ago tradition to use swidden agriculture, which is also called slash and burn, where when you have a large tropical environment to work with, you can burn an area and leave it to regenerate and have a 10-year cycle. But that you have to have a lot of space for that, and a very low population, frankly, peace and your own determination. And all of that was disrupted very much during the last 500 years. So the island really, really did suffer, and you do still see scars of it even today. And so the initial work that USC Canada was involved in 1996 and onward was working on the land and bringing up food security and just growing food more effectively and trying to do a lot of land rehabilitation. And that is very much something that the Rebia team is very successful at, and has built it in to the local practices from ancient animist traditions. And they deal with the forest spirits and all kinds of different processes in the community to regenerate the land and grow food. And part of this is a terracing process. If any of you are really interested in land management, I have a couple of publications I can share with you on participatory land use management, all of which leads to the food and seed security that's so central to our work today. This is a hillside up in Manatutu district that had been terraced and put through this land use participatory land use practices with Rebia and the community about 1 year previously. That first slide was just starting out, and this is 1 year. And this is a similar hillside 2 years after the terraces and the community are managing the land. And all of that is producing food now, as well as holding the hillsides and bringing back the forests. One of my favorite practices from when they do this participatory work is these living fences. And if others of you have been involved in environments where they have that 12-month growing season, which we don't have here in much of Canada, they'll make fences out of sticks that will root. And before you know it, the fence is actually a tree line. And so these living fences are a key part of the land use practices that build up the soil and regenerate that so that food can then be grown and more security is derived. Here's another sort of before and after picture that I've taken. I walked about 5 or 6 meters and just angled my camera to show one area that had been under these community practices for 2 years. And then the first slide is an area that's waiting. You can see a lot has been stripped away from under the trees. You can see the difference that is made by this community-based work that's very much they design and they maintain. And then within the terraces, to be doing intercropping with many, many different food crops and not following the monocropping systems, which were very much put to fore during the Indonesian time. It was to grow just corn, or on the lowlands, just rice, and follow with chemical practices. And that was very hard on the soil, and especially with all the social dislocation and the distress that came during those 30 years. So this is a field intercropped between corns, beans, and squash, which is a little familiar to North America, and also cassava. Quite often I'll also see this field with papaya trees, and sometimes pineapple, also used to demarcate between these very shallow terraces. So I think the record I once saw was 12 different crops growing on one set of terraced fields, and that was pretty amazing, I thought, from a hillside that had been essentially barren about 10 years previously. And this is a set of pictures which we may have used in USC Canada publications in the past, if any of you received those. But it is a picture all taken from the same spot, showing where a tree was planted. And the gentleman in the orange t-shirt in the bottom left is Matthias Mia, and he's the deputy director of Rebia, and I was just emailing with him this morning. So Matthias is still going strong, as is that tree. And that's the same hillside, 10 years apart. As an interesting tie back to the history, you can see in the top picture the peak of a building, and it's a community building at the top of the Manelima Hill. And it has a cement foundation that was laid by the Japanese for a gun site that was used for starting to launch what they thought would be an invasion of Australia. And that was being done from the Timor Hills many, many years ago. I was quite amazed when they told me that that's how the big cement pad had gotten up there, because I said, well, how did this happen to be here way up on this mountainside? And it really gave me pause to think about history. So now that much of the land in Timor is in a better and renewed condition in some communities, especially the ones where Rebia has been active for up to 10 years, and the food supply is improving, how do seeds fit into all of this process? This is a picture from one of the marketplaces in the capital city in Dili, and only about half of what's there would have been grown in Timor Leste. A lot still comes in from Indonesia. But the soil's coming back, and the road network is getting a little bit better. People's nutrition is improving slowly, with the possibility of having gardens with off-season vegetables, so that while they're waiting for the corn and beans to come to harvest, there are squash, and there's eggplants, and there's green country beans and tomatoes, and even carrots and cabbage I've seen as well, that those are now available in the off season. So the food supply is much more diverse and secure in some of the highland valleys. How do seeds fit into this process? Because it is important to have the seeds available so that you can regenerate and be sustainable over the long term. This is a picture of myself and Matthias talking with a couple of farmers a few years ago, and they, as you can see, had really taken to growing vegetables in the shoulder seasons around their main crops, and we're just starting to get to the process of saving some of the seeds from those crops instead of harvesting all of them for themselves and then to sell onward outside of the community. And it took a long time for food to be secure enough so that people would save back something and not eat it, because in some crops the seed is the food, such as with beans and with corn and with rice. And if you're food insecure and need to use all of that harvest for your food supply of the year, it's very hard to save back seed varieties or a couple of varieties, and very often you only have one when you're food insecure. So USC Canada has worked with Rebia in these communities to build up diversity. So they have 5 or 6 different varieties of corn. We'll bring corn from one valley to the next valley and try it out, and have a couple of farmers take a chance in growing 3 or 4 varieties one year and then sharing those out. The same with beans, trying to diversify what's available in the community. And then coming to vegetables, to have much of what you see in this picture here is mustard greens, which are a really tasty and effective, fast-growing green leafy vegetable that's very popular and very healthy. But if you want to have seeds of mustard greens for the next year, you need to leave a portion of your plants and let them go to seed, in which case the greens aren't quite as tasty. They sort of lose some of their appeal. But it takes planning that out and saving those back. I'd be curious to know if anybody listening tonight is how you get your seeds, if you're doing any gardening either in the past or this year. Where do you get your seeds? Here's one of our polls. Thank you, Grace, for arranging these. So let's see. So lots of people buy them from a greenhouse or a store. And some people do everything, which is great. The 44% of the people with us tonight get them from a greenhouse or from a store. And some people save some of their own and exchange with friends and get them from stores. And a few people go garden. And last summer, I didn't have a vegetable garden. So there's lots of, this summer I do because I have a little more time around the house. But last summer I didn't. So thank you very much, Grace. And those are all three key ways that people in Timor-Leste need to be able to get seeds. Because when your only source is a dealer who comes through maybe once or twice and says, hey, I've got these, you better buy them now, I'm not gonna be back, and they cost this much, you may be taken to say, yep, I better buy those, and who knows where they've come from. Who knows if they're gonna germinate, if they've been stored well, if they may have been treated with all sorts of external chemicals that you don't know. So it was very important, and Timor-Leste was almost 100% dependent on external seeds, especially for vegetables, a few years ago. And so we've really turned our attention to local seed sources and building up the local ability to produce seed and share seed between communities. At the start, again, it all comes around to the land. If you're going to be producing a garden that is for vegetables, produce for eating and saving for seed, it's working with the soil around what you'll see in a moment are the community seed banks. So here's pictures of people digging and getting compost pits ready so that they can have really high quality gardens cooperatively run near the community seed banks. And this is one of the buildings. And you'll see in the middle there, I didn't realize he was in this picture, is my colleague Nicholas. He and I traveled to Timor-Leste. He is one of the auditors and accountants at USC Canada, SeedChange. And we traveled to all the Asia programs one summer doing both program and financial audits and trainings. And it was a lot of fun to have him with me. So there he is waving in the middle. But that's one of the community buildings that has a community seed bank inside. So it's not a big building. It's not very high tech, but it absolutely is doing the job. This is the kind of thing inside there. They put up a display for us of the many different varieties. And a key part of the community seed banks up in the highlands is to identify what people are growing. So we do a process of a seed security assessment. And SeedChange does these all over the world and adapts them to contexts as diverse as Somalia, to Ethiopia, Timor-Leste, Bangladesh, Bolivia, and Guatemala. We've done them all over the world, and it's very effective for farmers being able to really bring forth their knowledge about what they have, how adaptable it is it available when they need it, who is saving what varieties are there, and what are their characteristics. So these are just some examples of corn that's grown up in Manelima. And from another seed security assessment process around beans, also 2 different kinds of beans that are grown in Manelima. And these will have different characteristics, such as being resistant to pests, or storing very well, or being able to handle very damp conditions. All of which is really important farmers' knowledge to keep track of. And then the process of putting together one of these small community seed banks. This one is in the community of Fatabloco. And again, it's not very high tech. It is designed to work with the community, manage it. There's a community seed bank management committee, and then there's a larger group of farmers that make sure each of these seed varieties are grown out each year so that they stay viable. They do workshops to document the characteristics, which varieties are good in these conditions, which really happy being co-planted with some other variety. And then they keep track of who has sort of the base seed knowledge. And ideally you want 3 or 4 people to have this information and to be able to share it. And they will have seed fairs to exchange seeds, and also be there if a member has something really sad happen, like there's a fire at their house or a landslide and they lose their crop, they're able to re-establish both their maize and beans and then vegetable seeds as well from being a member of the community seed bank. And they do reuse things, and you'll see, yes, indeed, these are water bottles, and the others are a very common little food container that you see around. So we do keep them low tech, but there is the cabinet to help keep out pests, especially mice and other little critters like that. And they do have quite a challenge keeping the seeds viable, which is why the committee is so very important. Does anybody do some seed saving of their own from their own gardens? So let's see what the results are. A few people save seeds and a few people don't. I do a little bit of seed saving, not a lot. I save a few, but I do help support and do some of the backyard gardener seed saving trainings for the Ottawa Seed Library. And in some ways, saving seeds is one of the basic and easiest steps one can add to a garden. Some vegetables, it's really easy to save seeds and have good results, and some are more complicated. One of the key issues in Timor Leste is that it's very damp and very hot all the time. And the most important thing for saving seed from year to year, season to season, is to be able to keep them dry and ideally cool. They don't need to be frozen. In fact, sometimes there can be problems with freezing seeds, but you want to be able to keep them dry, and dry is very hard to achieve in Timor Leste because it's so very, very humid, which is why in these community seed banks, they're constantly putting them out to dry on hot, dry days. They'll actually open up the collection and dry them in the sun. I don't have any good pictures of that, I'm afraid. And then get them back into the bottles and make sure people are growing them every year, because it's very easy for mold to deteriorate the seeds, and then they will lose those varieties. Come on. There. So a next step from having these little community seed banks, and we definitely don't want them just to be museums where seeds are held and talked about. They're meant to be living and growing, and we're tracking, and it's getting better each year. It doesn't always work perfectly with Rabia and the community field workers who are out there to track how many new varieties, if farmers are growing more varieties each year, what's working well. We do track that information as a basis of determining the level of food security. But now the push in this last year, and these pictures are from this last winter. They were sent to me, they were taken in November, December, January, and sent to me in February by Leonora, who manages the Community Seed Bank program. This is in seed production, so that the farmers now have these, particularly in Fatabloko and Batara, have long-standing community land use practices. In fact, that's where that tree picture is from, is just near Batara. So their land is in good shape, their food security is much better, the nutrition is very stable in the communities now, and they want to become seed providers for more and more of the country. So they are in seed production, and they picked 2 key vegetables to focus on this year. And so they set up growing this, which is bitter gourd, which somebody might grow them here in Canada. I don't know, but they're a really healthy vegetable. They're eaten both at the green state and at the bright orange state. But to save the seeds, you need to leave them on the vine until they're quite brown and kind of mushy for the seeds to be considered viable and really strong and worth saving. And here's their seed production fields that they did by the community seed banks. You can see they built some really nice local trellises for the vines. There's the flower and the young plants coming up, and there's a nice little heart made out of some of the harvested seeds. And they produced 14 kilos of what we've been able to tell is quite high quality bitter gourd seed. And that's a lot of bitter gourd seed. And they are starting to sell it onwards to neighboring communities, and they've really stocked every one of the members of their community seed bank and their own stocks. And they're setting aside to do another big production of really growing quite, 40 or 50 plants just for the seed, not for the vegetable to eat. And this is mustard seed production. You might remember back that picture of me talking on the hillside with the farmers growing mustard seed for mustard greens for eating and for selling, and they had been getting seed from dealers. And they're now able to produce their own seed. And these are their seed plots where they have an enclosed area protected from the animals that roam around. And they will let all of these go to seed, let it bolt and go well past when they would eat the greens. And they produce kilos. I'm trying to remember what Leonora said. It was something like 5 kilos of mustard seed. And that's just billions of mustard seeds. And from what we can tell from germination tests that they've done, it's really quite high quality, and they were very, very pleased. And they've again been able to sell some of it. We keep their own seed banks really well stocked and make sure more and more families in their communities have lots of mustard seed to plant and save in their own homes. I was wondering if anybody had gotten anything started. I haven't, I was speaking a little bit with Grace about the weather today. Has anybody got some seeds already started? I think this is our last poll, so we'll see what people want to say. So let's see what the results are. Some things are already in the ground. Over 50% of people already have a few seeds started, and some are waiting to plant. And some people might give this a try afterwards. Yay! It's always worth giving it a try. That's how I started gardening many years ago. So I thought I would sort of round out a bit of what I wanted to share this evening, and just the importance of having communities able to start seeds on their own and be seed secure, as well as being able to grow more vegetables. And the top two pictures are from starting seedlings in Timor Leste. One is a raised bed, and the other was there in the ground where little seedlings, and then they will transplant those onwards. And then the picture on the left is not from my seed starting this year, because they're actually already out in the garden, but I do like to start things in eggshells and in egg cartons. I find they're very easy to have at hand, and they're just the right size, and they're pretty easy to get out in the garden. So it's something that we have in common with people in Timor Leste. I remember having people relate to me how here in Canada there was often the hardest time of year was in late summer, early fall, when the farmers on the prairies were waiting for their harvest to be ready. Could be some of the most difficult times of the year, unless they had a garden that was producing food for during that lean time as they waited for the main crop. And that's very similar to what happens in Timor-Leste. As they're waiting for their main summer crop of maize and beans and cassava to come to harvest and be their main food source for the year, there can be many, many weeks when there isn't enough to eat. And that's why we've focused so much on diversifying the gardens and also making sure that the seed supply is secure in lots and lots of sources, and that people have the ability to exchange seeds between the community seed banks and the ability to be secure for the long term. So with that, I'm just coming up to my last slide, and here's one of the Community Seed Bank Management Committee members in Batara, and she gave me the nicest wave from her very impressive personal garden. So with that, I'm back to that picture that I used at the very beginning, and to say obrigado, which is thank you in Portuguese, which people say all the time in Timor-Leste. There is the website if you'd like to see more about Rebia itself, and also our own website, which I hope you'll have a look at. And we also have a presence on Facebook, both Rebia and SeedChange, and all of those other social media channels, which I'm afraid I'm less familiar with. So I think we still have a few minutes for questions. If I'm correct, Grace, do we still have a little bit of time?
Yes,
I've been seeing the chat box has been bubbling with things.
Yeah, there's been some comments in the chat. Lots of people saying what kind of seeds they're saving and plants they're starting that they grew up. Awesome to hear. Seems like you're really connecting with the gardeners in the crowd.
Good.
Yeah, I did want to ask you, there are a few questions that have come up already.
Sure.
One question that I had that you might want to think about is, do island nations like Timor-Leste have any special considerations around food security?
In some ways it's an advantage, and in some ways it's a real challenge, because especially in Timor-Leste's situation, when they were under the Indonesian period, there was no say. food was brought in, you were to grow rice, you were to follow these rules, that's the way things had to be. And then when it changed in 1999 and under the 4 years with the UN mandate, there was a lot of, okay, we just need to feed people. So let's just feed people, you know. And so again, a lot of food, a lot of seed was brought in. And fortunately now in the last 10 years, the government is very young in every sense of the word. They're new at this. They've just had their third election. It was very exciting and it went really well. If you want to look up Timorese politics, please do. They're doing a great job as a young country. But it means their agriculture department is sort of, should we give big licenses to these corporations? They seem to have some good stuff. Should we listen to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN? Should we let the NGOs do, you know, they're figuring out what the policy is. So they're just, and we've been involved in some of those discussions. So it is very helpful that they don't have a lot of trucks coming across the border. There's only one border crossing from West Timor. It's quite tightly controlled because things are a little tense on that border. But so everything comes in by ship and by airplane. Not much comes in by airplane, mostly just people and very, very high value things. So they can control it because they're an island, but they're also a very small, very far away part of the world. So there have been, I have heard discussions of them being taken advantage of by people with a good deal and a flashy brochure about what should be grown in Timor Leste.
Okay, thank you. There's a question people have been upvoting. I just wanted to say if you can put your question in the Q&A if you haven't had a chance yet, or you can vote for other people's questions. I think I forgot to mention that again, but some people are wondering how many farmers are supported by a single seed storage facility?
Okay, the community seed banks usually are based in communities that are about 100 or 150 households. And there'll be a management committee of about 20, 25 people. And there's usually 4 or 5 that are really at the core, like the movers and shakers. And then they have a committee. And then there's a good 100 or so households. So, and each household, they tend to be quite large, can have 5 to sometimes as many as 10 people. So one of those little community seed banks can touch on 1,000 human beings, I would say. But it's about 100 households, maybe 120. Depends on the community. Some of them are a little more densely populated than others. The whole country has, I think it's only 1.3 million people. It's quite small.
Okay, awesome.
And I should mention, and I should have done this at the very part, MCIC and the Manitoba Government Matching Grant Program supports this work in Timor-Leste this year, and we're hoping, if we do good reports and continue to do well, for another 3 years. And it's about 8,000 Canadian dollars, and it's very, very much appreciated. So there is a Manitoba connection, and if you receive things from SeedChange, you will notice that we will mention the Timor-Leste work frequently, especially for the folks in Manitoba.
I can see why you'd mention it. You've been doing some great.
I can't believe I forgot that at the start.
Oh, no, that's great. So some people are wondering if the farmers involved with the seed bank are volunteer community members or are some paid staff?
They're all local people, and it's their community seed bank. So they're pitching into this for their food security and with their volunteer time. And they're all farmers. Every single one of them makes their living growing food on those hillsides up in the mountains. There is a part-time community staff person from Rabia, and they're also involved with the ongoing land use work and the different programs funded by the other donors that can be in the area. As I mentioned, the Japanese funding and the German funding and the Asia Foundation, etc. So there's community workers around, but there's usually one that spends about half time just to make sure the meetings continue to happen and all. But as the seed banks become more mature, they need less and less of that support, and we're hoping to have 2 new ones start this year, and that process is just getting underway in June and July in totally new communities.
That's great. So someone's asking, they would like to share this information with their community. Are you have any resources that could get youth who are passionate about food policy or food security to advocate for these issues?
Absolutely. And probably the easiest thing is for people to get in touch with me. And I didn't put my email up here at the end, but my email is kgreen@weseedchange.org. And I'm sure Grace can send it out if there's a thank you note to anybody. And you can send out this whole PowerPoint, Grace, if you'd like. That would be fine with me. And people are welcome to write to me. I have a couple of documents that I can send right away, and then I can connect to our Farmers are Solutions for Climate Change campaign that we have. Our executive director has actually been in the news quite a lot lately, and on the radio and across Canada in some different editorials just in the last few weeks about seed and food issues internationally and here in Canada. And I'd love it anytime people want to talk about Timor-Leste. So please feel free to get in touch with me and we can follow up and connect you with some great people.
Okay, and I've put Kate's email in the chat. If anyone would like to reach out, you can find that there. So the next question is, people are curious what the bitter gourd tastes like and if there's any difference between the color of the gourd.
Well, it's a pretty chunky, meaty gourd, kind of like a zucchini, but it has that incredibly bumpy outside. And it does have a little bitter taste when it's quite green at the early part of the season. And the cuisine in Timor-Leste, I would often ask, oh, how do you cook this? How do you cook that? And they just say, you put it in oil and you make it hot. You put it in oil and make it hot. That's just, it's not quite like the cuisine one might think of in Southeast Asia, and a lot of that comes from 400 years of colonialism and another 40 of pretty serious oppression. So sometimes they'll put some onion, and sometimes there'll be some chili, but they sort of cook up vegetables and let them speak for themselves. Not a lot of fancy spices are used.
Someone's clarifying in the chat the yellow specifically. I don't know if you know that information.
The yellow of the three that were there.
Yeah, like when the bitter gourd is yellow.
Then it's getting more and more ripe, and it actually has a lot less flavor, and it gets a little mushy. And then they let it get very soft and brown, and that's when the seeds inside are mature. I can relate it to, you know how we like cucumbers because we can just eat the seeds just as they are. When I've been with if on occasion, Mateus has been here to Canada, for example, a few years ago for a big conference and organizing that we had here in Ottawa, and he saw the cucumbers here and he said, oh, these aren't even ripe yet, these aren't even ready, you eat them when they're babies, come on, because they're not viable. They're used to things like cucumbers, soft gourds like that being left in the field a lot longer, and then the seeds are quite hard and woody, and the seeds are more mature, but they really don't have much taste. So that's the yellow stage of the bitter gourd. They're getting towards the end of when you'd even want to eat them, but they are still eaten then. Okay. And then they leave them a couple more weeks and then the seeds are ready.
Okay, people are curious about that. So I have a question here about the seed dealers. So what are the seed dealers' opinions or reactions to farmers that save seeds, I suppose, instead of going to them?
Fortunately, at the moment, the infrastructure and even there aren't even that many little towns up in the mountains. It's so different than other parts of Asia that I've been in. The dealers are they're just moving on. They just move through, and if somebody doesn't want to buy, they just keep on going down the road to the next stop on these little buses that travel the country roads up in the mountains. So someday we certainly hope that the community seed banking movement will be a serious threat. We would like to have one, and we actually have dreams and plans, and we're talking to the agriculture department and some other donors to really build up a national network and have it really become the base for the seed system. But that's a considerable scaling out from what we have right now. So the dealers they probably don't even hardly notice if there's a community that doesn't come out when they hop off the bus that afternoon to try and sell. They'll just, okay, and they'll move on.
Okay, someone's curious about the intercropping you mentioned. If you know where that came from or the history of that or how that started.
Well, it was, from what I know of the ancient systems and everything in Timor-Leste, there was a lot they grew food in the forest. The mountains, as you see in this picture here, they didn't clear a lot of fields. They grew things in the forest, intercropped everything all the time. That's just how you harvested wild foods and you grew a few things. You did little tiny plots maybe of some cassava. Beans and corn, of course, only came in 500 years ago. Those were brought by the Portuguese. They didn't exist in Timor-Leste before then, but now they are staples. But to intercrop and really feed the soil at the same time as nutrient is feeding the crops by having the corn and the beans and the squash and everything together, you regenerate the soil at the same time. And that's really been something that was very much lost under the hundreds of years of not being self-determining. And so I would say that it came from USC Canada Timor-Leste and the wonderful field staff that we have, and they did a lot of little demonstration plots for people in the early days. Mateus himself would go up and rent a piece of land for 2 years and plant things together just for people to see what was possible. And now it just takes off. And they have great documentation and training materials in Tetun and posters and in new valleys. It still takes a year or two, but it gets going very quickly. But in those early days, it was very slow.
That's great. Some people are pointing out in the chat that intercropping is really important for building healthy and resilient soils in Canada as well. I think that's very true.
It is.
Keeping that in mind as I was planting my own garden.
Funny that. What do you know? It works here too.
Yeah, so people are asking about the community seed library and the workshops. They're just wondering how they spread the word in the community. They're thinking
I don't know if there's a community seed library in Winnipeg. I would be surprised if there isn't. I know there, if you go to the Seeds of Diversity Canada, which is seeds.ca website, and under their events, there were, of course, almost no CD Saturdays this year across Canada. And USC Canada has been a part of CD Saturdays since the very beginning and often had a presence at the ones in Winnipeg. And I think there was always one in Brandon as well. And Prairie Harvest Seeds are longtime friends of ours too, that those were key places. And from the CD Saturdays, often workshops and things like seed libraries sort of came up in the off season from CD Saturdays as a way for people to exchange locally adapted seeds that they could then use for their own gardens. So I would go to seeds.ca and under events, select to see what was planned in Manitoba, because I know they were all planned, but they all had to stop because they're usually in March and April. So they were all came to a halt very quickly this year, but they'll still be listed there and they'll be the contact people. And I bet there's a seed library or two around in Manitoba.
Someone pointing out that the Winnipeg Public Library does that, so I guess not.
Yay, the library is doing it. That's very common that the libraries have been doing it too.
Yes, they're not open right now, but maybe check your library. I think the original question was also asking how they spread the word in the community about their work and about their workshops.
In Ottawa?
The seed libraries in Timor Leste.
The community seed banks in Timor Leste.
People
they're quite specific to the village, though we do exchanges, and especially with these two new ones that are going to be starting up. One of the first things they'll do is actually Matthias and Leonora and the community worker, a couple people from Fada Bloco will go to the new areas and hang out for a few days and just talk to people and visit on their farms and talk to them about their seeds and just start the process going. They'll do it very person to person. The formal literacy level is extremely low in Timor-Leste. So sometimes posters are great, but the very best way is person to person, farmer to farmer. And it is also because of it's not that long ago that people were living in extremely difficult, traumatic circumstances for many generations. So there's still a nervousness sometimes with new things. So everything starts farmer to farmer, person to person.
Okay, thanks. Now I'm mindful we have just a few minutes left. So I'm wondering if you could share with us if there's a person you've met in this work or a story you've heard from the field that sort of keeps you going, keeps you inspired in this work.
Actually, I mentioned Mateus a few times, but Leonora da Costa is a woman who started working with Timor-Leste. She was just just finished high school in 1999 when everything fell apart and then came back together. And she started just as sort of part-time help with her doing some surveys, some nutrition surveys. And then she was able to become one of the field staff. I'm afraid it's gotten dark here in Ottawa, so I'm very poorly lit. Sorry, the sun just went down very quickly, but we're almost done. And Leonora has then slowly over the years, as well as starting her own family, she worked in the field and she completed a university degree part-time in the evenings, and now she's the head of our community development program. And she just completely astounds me in her very quiet, determined, strong Timorese way. She is leading the community seed banking program and also supports the work with JICA and a lot of the gender-based community work as well. And she's just an amazing woman, and I'm very, very proud that I still get to exchange emails with her, even though I can't come and see them this year. I was supposed to be there at this time. I'm very proud to, whenever I see her name pop up in my email, we have reports or work to do together. That's great. I can see how that would keep you going. You know, it sure does.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining and for their excellent questions. If you enjoyed this presentation, you're welcome to join us next month on June 18th for our next Local Brews with CLWR, which is Canadian Lutheran World Relief. Going to be sharing about a very exciting and interesting program they're doing with education with students in schools in Jordan. So if you sign up for our e-newsletter, you'll receive an email in the coming weeks with information on how to join that event. So I've just put a link in the chat if you wanted to do that, and watch for information on our social media. I want to say thank you to Kate. I know I was really fascinated with this talk, and I've learned a lot, and it's inspiring me to go back to my garden and see what I can do out there. So
You're welcome.
yes. So thanks everyone for attending. After this ends, you'll receive an email with a link to a 2-minute evaluation form to fill out. Please share your feedback with us. I can see lots of you are putting pluses in the chat, so feel free to do that. That's our applause for Kate tonight. So thanks everyone, and have a great night, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, Kate.